A concept many of you have most likely come to be familiar with, and with the recent interest in the horror of the backrooms, its eeriness is very much prominent in today's day and age. But something that is not often touched upon is why these spaces are actually viewed as so foreboding and unnatural in the first place. And in this video, I aim to try and pinpoint what makes these spaces so unnerving to the human mind. So to start to understand why liminal spaces and liminality as a whole is so eerie to us, we first have to learn what defines something as liminal, or having liminality. Now, just by doing a quick Google search, Merriam-Webster defines liminal as of, relating to, or situated at a sensory threshold, barely perceptible or capable of eliciting a response. Now, going off of this definition, we can gather that describing something as liminal or having liminality means that it suppresses our ability to form a response from our senses, or it just cuts off sensory stimulation to a point where we're unable to form a response, like we would to something such as a slap, or even just by listening to the audio from this video. But how does this definition really tie into the horror of liminal spaces? Because just by looking at this definition, yeah, it does seem like a strange concept that something would suppress our senses in some way, but it's not really eerie or scary like we're used to with environments like the backrooms. So to really get a grip and understand this better and how this applies to liminal spaces as a whole, I think we need some exposure therapy and to get some first-hand experience. So let's dive in. Some Gary's mod. Now, what you just witnessed is exactly what you would experience yourself if you started up a normal game of Gary's mod without anyone else. And just from those few moments in game, we can experience something that makes us uneasy, and that something is kind of hard to put a pin on and really understand why we perceive such a regular environment as feeling so off. Now, to me, there are two major things that really make this kind of experience so off-putting, and that is how normal and lived in everything looks while also having strange and unexplainable architecture. And the second being the lack of people and stimulation of living things just existing around you. Now, while these 2 points explain what is causing this phenomenon, we are still left with the question of why would the absence of these small details make us so uneasy in the first place, and why does just making a few parts of an environment different make it so uncomfortable? Like, for example, when you go to an abandoned building, we may feel uneasy, but it's not really because no one is there, or the architecture is a bit strange, because we don't really expect anyone to be there, and we don't expect the building to be upkept or even make sense sometimes because, well, it's abandoned. But by looking at pictures of liminal spaces, these expectations kind of change, because you can see that they're clean and made to look like they at least have some life, and the lack thereof, combined with questionable architecture, causes our mind to view these spaces as kind of off-putting. Now, something that I think may explain this phenomenon is the uncanny valley theory, a term that many of you are probably familiar with, but just to review, it's when something is essentially almost human but just falls short. For example, many pictures produced by AI trying to replicate human faces or bodies end up making something that looks almost like a person but just can't get all the details right, causing our minds to feel slightly uneasy about the image that is produced. I think that same kind of theory can be applied here, where the environment seems so human and man-made while also failing to make logical sense in our minds due to the layouts of these environments making almost no sense. For the best example of this, I once again draw your attention to the backrooms, because I believe this to be the best example of creepy liminal spaces and the easiest argument for the uncanny valley theory applying here. Because just from this one image, you can see that the structure and the build looks human. You can also see that the layout from just this one picture does not make a lot of sense, with walls being there for seemingly no reason and everything just being completely empty, failing at the last second to seem human and formulate a sensible reason for its existence. This very element of expecting a space to be a certain way and almost meeting those criteria but just falling short and being unnatural and feeling inhuman fits perfectly into the uncanny valley theory. However, I have yet to mention probably the strongest support for this theory and probably the most interesting and biggest uncover to liminal spaces: the lack of life. Now, I briefly touched on this, but this is definitely the most eerie part of these kinds of places. So just think about this for a second. No matter where you are in the world, whether that be in a bustling city or deep in a forest or even on a farm, you'll at least see or hear some sign of life. However, when it comes to these liminal spaces, all of these signs of life are taken away, aside from the structures in these spaces themselves. And as we saw in the Gary's mod gameplay, this leaves you with an experience that is such a lack of stimulation. This lack of stimulation of other living things specifically leaves us with an eerie feeling that we are the only being in existence at that moment. However, the well-preserved structures almost argue against that, but within many of these spaces, even the structures themselves are inhuman, adding more to the thought that we really are the only being currently existing in that moment. Now, the textbook reaction from the culmination of all this is immediate dread and paranoia, but again, what is causing this kind of reaction? Because as previously mentioned, a majority of the reactions from liminal spaces are explained by the uncanny valley theory. However, there are some other external factors at play here. What I'm referencing is the lack of life specifically causes a feeling of absolute isolation, which is a whole other interesting road to explore here. Now, going back once again to Gary's mod, you can somewhat put yourself in this kind of situation and feel some of that isolation, but you can just easily close the game and be sucked back into reality. So for this, I draw your attention to a very strange place that you probably wouldn't expect. Sometime in mid-September of 2018, a conversation would take place between two professional poker players, Rich Alati and Rory Young, where it would somehow end up with Young asking Alati how long he thought he could last in a locked and confined dark room, which Alati would respond that he thought he could last a month. This would ultimately lead Young offering Alati $100,000 if he could stay confined under these exact conditions for a month, which he would accept. Now, with the room being set up, Rich Alati would enter the room November 21st to begin his month-long confinement. However, after only 20 days, Alati would negotiate his release with Young, accepting a buyout of $62,400. Now, even with this buyout and technically winning the bet, he still suffered a significant mental toll, and in an interview done by Action Network, he actually described how he was prepared for this type of thing, with taking up meditation and even taking a silent retreat to Bali, where you learn to look inward to yourself in a more positive light without social interaction. But even despite all of this mental preparation and fortitude, he still fought a nasty battle in order to keep his mind together within the room. Now, in the interview, he described how his family was actually watching him through cameras that were streaming him from his confinement 24/7, and that they wanted him to speak to the cameras a couple times a day. But eventually, after what he thought was day 3, he had to give it up because he was so focused on not losing his mind, as he had started to hallucinate pretty significantly at this point. For example, in the interview, he described that he started to see things like shapes and colors at first, but eventually it moved on to bigger objects like trains, and even at one point he perceived the room as being filled with white bubbles, which he specifically said was a bit unnerving at first, but due to his mental fortitude and sort of training, he was able to embrace it and kind of have fun with it. Now, after all of these details, this bet initially probably doesn't seem like a good example of how a human mind would fare in a liminal space, due to the nature of Alati doing this voluntarily and having the big motivation of a $100,000 prize. But you have to remember that he survived for 20 days under these conditions with absolutely no light at all, which means he couldn't see a thing even while bathing himself or eating, and just by going about his regular day, which caused him to lose track of the days very, very easily and very quickly. And on top of all this, the only contact he had with the outside world was to obtain food. So, as you can see from just this one example, and the complete reason I brought it up is because even the most prepared and motivated of human minds cannot take isolation for a very significant amount of time without some sort of mental deterioration. The reason I mention all of this and give this example is because part of what we feel when we look at an image of a liminal space is possibly the subconscious dread of actually going through this type of isolation ourselves, and along with the confusing environment, this completely unnerves the human mind in a way not many other things do. So to close off this video, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for staying to the end. It really means so much. And the fact that this is my second video on this channel and you stayed to the end is just absolutely insane to me. So again, thank you. I'm going to say it over and over again, but thank you so much. And if you end up subscribing or liking the video, thank you even more. And I should be producing a bigger project here soon. I just have to have time to work on it because I do have finals for my college in about 2 weeks, but then I'll have some time off and I should have some time to work on it and get a couple projects done. So if you want to see some more content from me, you should see some more of that soon. And once again, thank you very much for watching and supporting me, and I will see you guys in the next one, hopefully. Thank you very much. Goodbye.